Hi everybody, Hassan Shariq, regulated Canadian immigration consultant, back with another video on Canadian immigration. In today's video, I'm going to talk about a very sought after topic, a very highly inquired topic, and that is spousal sponsorship for Canada, the PR category for spousal sponsorship. Now, there are a lot of Canadian citizens and permanent residents within Canada and outside of Canada who get married to people who are not Canadian citizens or permanent residents. And then they would want their spouse to be granted a PR under the spousal sponsorship category so that the couple can jointly move to Canada and live in Canada permanently. Welcome back. So the topic for today's discussion is PR application under spousal sponsorship category of Canada. First up, we will have a look at the eligibility factors. Now keep in mind that for spousal sponsorship, we are talking of two individuals. So one individual is the Canadian citizen or permanent resident. That person will be called as the sponsor in this video. And the other individual is the foreign national, the non-Canadian citizen or permanent resident. This person will be called as the applicant for PR. Now, in terms of eligibility for spousal sponsorship application, for sponsor, the major eligibility requirements that are there, that first, the sponsor has to be a Canadian permanent resident or a citizen or an Indian registered under the Canadian Indian Act. If you are on a different status, like say for instance, you are yourself on a work permit in Canada, in that case, you cannot apply for a PR for your spouse under the spousal sponsorship category. Rather, you will be applying for a work permit or some other temporary visa for Canada. So first eligibility requirement for sponsor is that you must be a Canadian citizen or permanent yourself. Secondly, at the time of your sponsorship application, the spousal sponsorship application, the sponsor must be 18 years of age. This also goes for the applicant as well. In some instances, people around the world get married at an age that they are still not 18, they're less than 18. And in many countries of the world, a marriage is accepted legal, even if it is, if the one of the couples or both of them are less than 18. But keep in mind that for spousal sponsorship application, you can only submit the application at a time when both the sponsor and the applicant have attained the age of 18. So if that's not the case, you've got married, then you have to wait till the time that you attain the age of 18. Now for a sponsor, there are two different scenarios in terms of their residency at the time that they submit their application. If you are a Canadian citizen, in that case, you can submit your application from within Canada, and you can also submit your application if you're permanently based outside of Canada. But if you're a Canadian permanent resident, then you can only submit your application for spousal sponsorship if you are based permanently in Canada. During the time that your application is being processed, you can definitely travel outside of Canada, but your permanent residence has to be in Canada at the time of your application submission and at the time that your spouse gets the PR grant. After this, there is the requirement that the sponsor must not be bankrupt. The sponsor must not be on social welfare from one of the provincial or federal governments. The sponsor also has to take a financial responsibility for the person that he or she is sponsoring, the applicant for PR. And there is a 3 years binding agreement when you do the spousal sponsorship agreement. So you say that you will take care of the basic financial needs of your spouse for 3 years from the time that he or she gets the PR granted. Daily expenses, you can have a livelihood. There is no such requirement that you need to have a certain income. There are certain issues because of which you as a sponsor could be deemed as ineligible even if you meet the eligibility requirements. So say for instance, you sponsored somebody in the past under the spousal sponsorship category and 3 years have not passed since that individual became a PR, say for instance, you guys got separated and now you would want to sponsor somebody else, until those 3 years have not passed, you are not eligible to sponsor somebody else. If you sponsored somebody in the past and that individual then went on to go to apply for social welfare, social assistance from a provincial or federal government, and you've not paid that amount, you are still not eligible for a new spousal sponsorship application. If you have conviction in the past where you physically, where there was an instance of physical violence against certain relatives, you also become ineligible for a spousal sponsorship application. If you yourself were sponsored by somebody in the past for your PR under the spousal sponsorship category, and then you came to Canada and then say the two of you got separated and now you would want to sponsor somebody else, you have to wait for 5 years from the time that you came to Canada and became a permanent resident yourself. You can only sponsor somebody else after 5 years from the date that you became a PR on a spousal sponsorship yourself. So how to apply for spousal sponsorship application? Previously, for years and years, this used to be a paper application where you had to fill in forms, you had to put in all the details and attach the documents and submit it to an office here in Canada. Then last year in 2022, the government launched an online submission method, and the paper application was in as well. So you could submit it either as an online application or as a paper application. Starting from September 2022, all applications for spousal sponsorship are now required to be submitted through an online portal. So there is an online PR application portal by the Immigration Department of Canada. So you have to submit your application through that. Now, for that submission, there are two options. You as the individual yourself can create an account, like you can be the sponsor, you create an account, and over there you provide all the required Department of Immigration forms and the supporting documents, and you submit that application. Or you could use the services of a regulated Canadian immigration consultant like myself or a Canadian lawyer, wherein we submit your application as authorized representative. In this case, we are required to do all the paperwork, fill in all the forms, submit it, and then all the communication with the department happens through us. Now let's have a look at some of the documentation that is required as part of your spousal sponsorship application. For spousal sponsorship application, if you go online, you're able to find a document checklist, which will give you an overview of what documents are required. It lists all the forms. There's a set of forms, 5 or 6 forms that you're supposed to submit. Some of these forms are common to everybody, and then depending on the country that the applicant is based in, you might be required to submit some additional forms. So these are called the country-specific forms. First, the sponsor has to provide documents related to his or her immigration status in Canada. If you're a Canadian citizen, this could be your Canadian passport or citizenship certificate. If you're a Canadian permanent resident, this will be your permanent resident card, your landing paper. Then the sponsor has to provide documentation which provides information on your source of income. As part of your spousal sponsorship application, you are required to provide documentation which provides proof on how your relationship developed. A lot of times when you marry somebody who's not based in Canada and is based in some different country, so depending on your circumstances, you have to provide that how did you get to know this individual? How did your relationship come into being? And then once it was finalized, the different wedding events or ceremonies that happened. Now the officers do require supporting documentation which varies on the culture and customs based on where the sponsored person resides or where the wedding actually happened. So if somebody is getting married, say in Pakistan, the kind of ceremonies, the rituals that will take place should be very specific to how the culture is in Pakistan. If somebody is getting married in say Colombia, the requirements will be slightly different in terms of the cultural context over there. If somebody is getting married in say Indonesia, the requirements will be different. So you have to provide documentation which is close by to the cultural context of the place where the marriage took place. You have to provide evidence in terms of pictures and other documentation wherein you show the actual wedding events that happened. A lot of times, people who are based in Canada and that get married to somebody who's outside of Canada, you are also required to provide proof of your communication. Like if you've been having WhatsApp communication before the wedding took place, and in many instances afterwards as well, because you as a Canadian citizen or PR might have returned back, whereas your spouse might still be in the country of residence, and sometimes it's not really easy to get a visa to Canada, so they're waiting on their spousal sponsorship application. For spousal sponsorship application, the PR applicant, who's your spouse based outside of Canada or who's the foreign national, is also required to provide police certificates from their current country of residence, and if in the past few years they've lived in some other country for a period of at least 6 months in a row, they're required to provide police certificates for that as well. For any spousal sponsorship application, any document that you provide which is not in English or French, you are required to have that translated through certified translators. For spousal sponsorship application, your spouse, who's the PR applicant, is not required to meet any language proficiency requirements or an income requirement or an education requirement. Sometimes this is a confusion that people have. Reason is that he or she is not being assessed on a skilled migration application for Canada under a point-based system. Rather, as long as you meet the eligibility as a sponsor and he or she meets the eligibility in terms of some of the factors that are already discussed, and the officer is convinced through your submission that this is a genuine relationship, that individual will be granted the PR. The three important things that I must mention here, which you need to work carefully on, are proof of your relationship, any documentation that provides evidence on how your relationship started, how it grew, once you got married and say you're not living together, how it is continuing. So any kind of documentation relating to your proof of relationship. Secondly, any evidence which shows proof of joint ownership, companionship as a married couple. So say for instance, now you have joint accounts, joint property, or you send money to each other, you send gifts to each other. There are things that are jointly in both of yours name. That is very, very important. And thirdly, the actual events, proof relating to that. Now, depending on how many events that took place in some cultures, people would only do one big event, but then there are cultures in subcontinent, in Middle East, where you'd have multiple functions. So whatever different functions, events that took place, provide as much evidence related to that. To sum it up, I would say that it is very, very important to make sure that you provide enough evidence, supporting evidence for spousal sponsorship application as much as you can. The reason is that officers are always critical when it's a spousal sponsorship application, and they are trying to make sure that there isn't any immigration fraud for what they call as marriage or relationship of convenience. So this is all on the topic of spousal sponsorship for Canada. This is a vast topic. So very honestly, it's hard to cover it in one setting. I will be making more and more videos on this specific topic because there's a large number of Canadian citizens and permanent residents out there who do get married to people who are not Canadian citizens and permanent residents, and then they need to apply for this. If you have any questions or queries on this, do post them in the comment section. That will help me know what are the topics that people would want to know and they are having difficulty with, and I'll definitely try and make more videos on those topics. For those who would wish to discuss their spousal sponsorship application with me, you can find the consultation link below in the description of the video. With that, I'll ask for leave for today with the prayer that wherever you are, you stay well, you take care of your families, and I'll soon be back with another video on Canadian immigration. Take care. Bye-bye.